excitement. Don't miss it. Special thanks to KUBears.com for this report. Following in the footsteps of her iconic father, Dina Martin is an internationally acclaimed entertainer in her own right. She brings her recognizable voice to the State Theater in a tribute to Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin Friday, April 25th. Accompanied by a quintet in concert, Dina Martin pays homage to her iconic dad and to Frank Sinatra with unforgettable standards. Showtime is 8 p.m. Tickets are $35 and $30 and can be purchased by visiting the State Theater box office, 800-999-STATE, or online at statetheater.org. Weather-wise, KUR reminds you to like Monsoon Mike's Weather Headquarters on Facebook for up-to-the-date weather information and for late-breaking news, weather, sports, and traffic, sometimes before we can even get it live on the air. Make sure you like our award-winning social media sites. It's on Kutztown University Radio on Facebook and Twitter at twitter.com/KU Radio. From KUR News, I'm Mike Regensberger. Have a fantabulous day.
This is Tom Johnson with your KUR Meteorology Department weather forecast. After some midweek showers, more sunshine. This is Tom Johnson.
Any views or opinions expressed on KUR are not necessarily those of Kutztown University, Kutztown University Student Government, Kutztown University Student Services Incorporated, KUR staff and management, or other affiliated organizations.
Ballsy fires, and it's caught for a touchdown. It's gone! And Giroux's gone! And the Sixers have scored 9 in a row. Are you kidding me?
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Tyler Werner Show right here on Kutztown Radio. This post-Easter weekend edition. We apologize a little bit for the late start. We actually, KUR has its weekly meeting before, at 11 o'clock, and today we had elections for next year for the station coming up, for the president, the vice president, the secretary, and etc. So yeah, we had some interesting elections and a bunch of speeches to go through, and Mike Regensberg, who runs the station and produces the show, and we just rushed over here, and we're gonna put it, kind of just put this show together on the fly today, I guess, in a sense. It's gonna be a little more spontaneous, I guess, than usual, and certainly I think it's gonna be a fun show, though. I mean, we had some interesting things go on in the past week, as far as Philadelphia sports figures goes, past and present, which we'll definitely get into, and of course we're coming off Easter weekend, spending time with the family or whatever it is, celebrating Easter. And also it was a very interesting week as far as sports goes. Interesting weekend/week since, the last time I was on the air. As far as sports goes, even without the Sixers in the NBA playoffs, I was watching some of that, while I was working, and definitely some interesting things going on with the NBA playoffs, which we'll talk about a little later. Because even though the Sixers are done essentially waiting for the draft, nevertheless, I mean, the NBA playoffs are interesting, as well as the NHL playoffs, which fortunately we have the Flyers in this year. We do have a Philadelphia team in the playoffs, other than the Eagles. This earlier in this year, and the Flyers had to play 2 games at Madison Square Garden, a building where they haven't won. I believe they had a 9-game losing streak or something like that going on up at Madison Square Gardens against the New York Rangers. And last week I talked about that edge that the Rangers have in this series, and last Thursday night when the series began, game 1 between the Flyers and the Rangers, the Flyers came out absolutely flat. I mean, they get beat 4-1. They were actually they scored the first goal of the game actually, but they took an awful lot of penalties, certainly, and especially in the third period when they were down to the Rangers 2-1. It was crucial for them to come back, and in the third period is really where they shot themselves in the foot, and they took several, a string of minor penalties that just, kept them, spending, maybe over half the period, killing penalties, all while they're down 2-1 in the game. And, again, I mean, last week I talked about, I talked about how, Mike Missanelli, had an interesting interview with Zach Ronaldo, who came, is now back from suspension, of course. A guy who, takes a lot of unnecessary penalties, I think, at times for the Flyers. And, of course, he kind of, he oftentimes says, oh, well, the refs are, being a little too hard on me. And, I wouldn't totally buy that. I mean, if you watch the games and, you see some of the penalties he commits and, sometimes the fights he gets in, you wonder why is he doing that, or, whatever. This game, kind of just went to this game one of the series kind of just went to show that, what Mike Missanelli says, is right. You can't take unnecessary penalties, especially in the playoffs like this.
Beast mode!
Yeah, I mean, and, Mike Missanelli really called Zach Ronaldo out on this, and, several players on the team in the third period when they needed to, get a tying goal to stay in the game, they spent, so much of that third period essentially just, having to kill penalties, and ultimately they can't mount any offense, the rest of that game, and they lose 4-1. And now, of course, they had Ray Emery in goal, and, because, as I talked about last week, Steve Mason, the primary goaltender of the Flyers, suffered an injury last week in the Pittsburgh thriller of a game that ultimately landed the Flyers playoff spot against the Rangers. Ray Emery, I mean, he had to face a lot of shots in game one, while the Flyers, I think they got a whopping 15 shots on goal the entire game. I mean, that's, you can't. And not only that, I mean, Claude Giroux didn't get any shots on goal. I think the entire first line in that game just didn't get any shots on goal. They really came out flat in game one, and right off the bat in this series, the Flyers, things were not looking up for the Flyers. However, though, on Sunday afternoon, on Easter Sunday afternoon, I should say, the Flyers really. Found themselves in a different situation this time in the game. Game 2 against the Rangers once again at Madison Square Garden. They were down 2-0, and in the second period they just they come back and eventually they take the 3-2 lead, basically hold on to it, and they score an empty netter at the end of the game and get a big 4-2 win here. And again, once again, you got Ray Emery in goal. Steve Mason was still not 100% for this game. And essentially, what you had was, you had a great performance by Ray Emery. He had 33 shots against him. He only let in 2 goals. And the Flyers, kind of, they found their way to get the puck past Henrik Lundqvist, a top 5 goaltender in the NHL. And the strong point of the New York Rangers team in general. Flyers come out strong in this second game here, and they break this losing streak that they've had with division rivals, the New York Rangers, going back to 2011, where they just haven't been able to win at Madison Square Garden, and here they come back, they take the 3-2 lead, and ultimately they win it 4-2. And this was a big game here, for as far as the series goes. And we'll talk about the rest of the series coming up ahead, a little later on in the show. But Ray Emery, gets the first star. As they have the 3 stars of the game, every hockey game, and Ray Emery was the first star here. Play backup goaltending, essentially, while Steve Mason recovers. But it's definitely, his performance in this game and the fact that they won, that they got the next 2 games in the series at the Wells Fargo Center. It's definitely raised an interesting discussion as to, if Steve Mason is back to 100%, do you put Mason back in, or do you ride with Ray Emery if he continues to play well? So, definitely something we'll talk about a little later in today's show. As the Flyers find themselves tied right now with the New York Rangers in a big game tonight, which will decide who takes the lead, the 2-1 series lead, in this playoff series. Now, last week, we'll move into a little different territory here. Last week it came out that, former Eagles quarterback, the greatest quarterback in Eagles history, borderline Hall of Famer. It's definitely a debate in and of itself, but it came out that Donovan McNabb was served a misdemeanor DUI arrest, a 1-day sentence, I believe in January it was, and a DUI, and somehow it never came out until just recently, just last week. This happened down in Arizona. It was released Thursday morning. I've had other high-profile athletes who have been incarcerated with no problems, and this latest athlete follows that same pattern. Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio said, apparently McNabb was arrested December 15th on the Salt River Prima Maricopa Indian community east of Phoenix, according to court records. And you got on ESPN here, you got the mug shot of Donovan McNabb, and it's I don't know how this only is coming out now, but it's quite ironic to me. I mean, that Donovan McNabb was caught here, with a DUI, and it's also quite ironic how last week I was talking on my show about how there's this texting, or somebody talking on the phone while they were driving, and almost hitting me on the road, essentially, not seeing me. And I also said how it's bad enough that we got people driving under the influence out there, and then here, only hours later, the story comes out that Donovan McNabb apparently had a DUI charge, and somehow it didn't come out until recently. And it says McNabb pleaded guilty on March 27th, and 9 days of his sentence was suspended. So I don't know, but yeah, the mugshot was released last Thursday morning, and that started a media frenzy about this arrest. Which again had not previously been reported, and somehow I don't know how it was not reported, but nevertheless, I mean, Don McNabb, served a DUI, and it's definitely had a lot of people joking. Certainly, I mean, I've been, as I say, a lot of I listen to a lot of sports radio in my spare time, and the jokes with Don McNabb are just have been floating all over the place. That kind of relate to his past tenure with Philadelphia, with the Eagles, and of course, we had earlier in this past season, the NFL season, the first home game with the Eagles, when Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs came into town. They had the Donovan McNabb jersey retirement ceremony, and he was he kind of famously said this.
Number 5 will always love you.
And it's definitely things like this that kind of sparked some jokes with this whole DUI thing, and we'll spread a couple of them throughout the show. But people have said, they see his arrest number and before we hit to the break here, and I heard somebody joke that when Donovan McNabb got pulled over for the DUI, what did he say, and etc. And there's been all kinds of jokes like that floating out there around on other sports radio stations. But one of them, they kind of took this Donovan McNabb retirement ceremony speech. They took that part, number 5, and they took his arrest number. Arizona's arrest number 9275. We'll always love you, and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of jokes been floating around, and with this Donovan McNabb DUI arrest. So we got other stuff kind of joke about on the show later. I don't know if I want to say joke about, but talk about that is a little bit mind-boggling in a way when we talk about Philadelphia sports athletes here in Philadelphia. So without further ado, we will head to the first break. It is the Tyler Werner Show, and we're running the Chip Kelly read option, if you will, here today on the Tyler Werner Show on Kutztown Radio.
It's Telescopic Topics, a look into the world above us.
Nicole Dirtsprung. Born in London on December 10, 1815, Lady Byron and her husband Lord Byron gave birth to Augusta Ada Byron. Lady Byron was worried her daughter would grow up to be like her crazy poet of a father, so she got Augusta a tutor that was heavy on science and math. Commonly known as Ada Lovelace, she is considered the first computer programmer when she translated a Swiss article about an analytical engine by Charles Babbage, a man who is considered the father of computing. He nicknamed her the Enchantress of Numbers. Introducing many computer concepts in her own comments of the article is what made her the first computer programmer. Her comments talk about how codes could be made for the machine to handle numbers, letters, and symbols. She predicted that the machine could fabricate more than just math equations. She wrote the following: supposing, for instance, that the fundamental relations of pitch sounds in the science of harmony and of musical composition were susceptible of such expression and adaptations, the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. Her article became the first transcript explaining the process of computer programming. Ada also predicted that Babbage's machine could produce music and pictures. This article also ended up being 3 times longer than the original Swiss article. Sadly, Ada lived a short life, dying at the age of 36 from uterine cancer on November 27, 1852 in London. One fun fact is that the United States Department of Defense developed a computer language which was named Ada after Ada Lovelace.
Telescopic Topics, a look into the world above us. Stay tuned to KUR for more telescopic topics, and for more information, or to hear this segment again, click on the Telescopic Topics icon on the KUR website at www.kutztown.edu/KUR. Telescopic Topics is a production of the KU Physical Sciences Department and is recorded by KU astronomy students in the studios of KUR. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
12:22 right here on the Tyler Werner Show on Kutztown Radio. The number to get in is 610-683-4859 on this show. And we also have the discussion post up on the Facebook page for the show as usual, facebook.com/Tyler Werner Show. We got some interesting / obscure topics to talk about today. We started out talking about the Flyers and this and that, and of course Donovan McNabb's DUI arrest. That
I'm embarrassed.
It didn't come out until just last week, but apparently happened back in December. I don't know. I mean, you share your thoughts on that. But we have another kind of interesting topic that came up last week. And I don't know how many people have heard about this because it's not... there's only audio for this. Phillies player, Jonathan Papelbon, rather interesting story. Last week he was getting interviewed, in the locker room. Guys like Derek Gunn, a staple of Comcast Sportsnet. I mean, growing up, I mean, I definitely recognize this guy. If I'm not looking at the TV screen, but Comcast Sportsnet is on, you can hear him and pick him out pretty easily. Jonathan Papelbon was apparently getting interviewed in the locker room late last week, and they were asking him about his he was irked by questions about his velocity and Jonathan Papelbon was not in a very good mood, I guess, and he wasn't, he kind of whined a little bit about, them asking about his velocity, and, apparently in this interview, at one point there's, it's not confirmed, but there are several accounts that agree that Jonathan Papelbon intentionally passed gas in Derek Gunn's direction in this interview. I mean, now, as far as, respecting the media goes and this and that, I mean, I don't know who out here has heard about this, but it's, it's not confirmed, but, we have audio here of it. And it's, it comes in a little down the road, so you have to listen. But it's just, it's one of these things, they're talking about velocity and, I mean, it is a bit juvenile in a way, but, it's like metaphorical and, I mean, it's just like Jonathan Papelbon, rubbing it in the media's face and kind of disrespecting. But let's see if we can listen here, and you tell me your thoughts on the Facebook page.
I got food stuck in my throat.
Did you have some adrenaline velocity today?
No, I just had velocity. I don't even know what I was doing. Felt good.
You made a comment a few times out ago that you felt like you had something to prove. Do you think you've proven it now?
Oh my God!
No. I think the only way we prove that is what happens at the last 2 weeks of the season. I don't think half a month proves anything.
Yeah, so that's the audio there. A rather awkward interview. It was around like maybe the 23-second mark. And I know, listeners out there don't have a timer going, but I mean, multiple interviewers basically said that that was for real what Jonathan Papelbon did here, and apparently in the general direction of Derek Gunn, as they're asking him these questions. I wish we could get I wish some kind of confirmation out of Derek Gunn that Jonathan Papelbon really did this. I mean, again, I mentioned how he's been a staple of Comcast Sportsnet, and I couldn't, if he talked about it, if he confirmed this on Comcast Sportsnet or something. I mean, I couldn't imagine how odd it would be. I mean, it might sound something like I was talking to Jonathan Papelbon in the locker room about his velocity when suddenly he passed gas in my direction, Derek Gunn, Comcast Sportsnet. And, I wish we could get some kind of confirmation from Derek Gunn himself, who, I guess apparently had to endure this, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't know. But, you talk about, kind of disrespecting the media in a sense. And, I've talked about this before. The media, their job essentially is to, kind of be the bridge from the players to the fans. Because, I mean, ultimately, it's the fans that pay the salaries really of the players. I mean, they, you don't have fans, you don't have income essentially, and you don't have jobs. I mean, it's the bottom line. And the fans have a right to this information, and we talk about this, with Chip Kelly, throughout the off season, not really wanting to speak at all voluntarily. And I mean, obviously there's requirements at times where Chip Kelly must speak, or else there's litigation and all kinds of stuff like that. But as far as like building a bridge to the fan base, it's something that Chip Kelly hasn't done, and kind of like Bill Belichick in a way. Now, as long as you're winning, if it's not as big of a deal. Winning kind of cures everything in a way. But if it goes back to the thing that if the Eagles come out flat next year or something, or just not even come out totally flat, but just don't meet expectations, then it's going to come back to haunt Chip Kelly in a way. The fans are going to be upset, and because more upset than had maybe Chip Kelly spoken more and addressed more about the details of things like getting rid of Deshaun Jackson and this and that. And this is kind of where I'm going here with the whole Jonathan Papelbon thing. And a lot of players and coaches, it's like the media is the enemy to them at times, I think. And I don't think it's totally fair. And I think that players and coaches, they got to understand the whole idea that these interviewers, they're not asking questions like this and that for their own sake. They're doing it for the greater good, and for the fans to be informed about what's going on, and I guess enlightened about what's going on, with the team, because you can't have the millions of fans of whatever professional sports team have an individual sit down with the coach and ask them this and that about, that's what the media is for, essentially. Bringing that information to the public. And, that's what they're trying to do here with Jonathan Papelbon. And, Jonathan Papelbon, I guess, decided to show off his velocity in a sense. So, whatever. But, again, it's these metaphorical things, and, it just, I mean, it's juvenile, joking here, but it's like metaphorical, and it's yet like Jonathan Papelbon was like doing it in an angry way, like angry kind of joking here, but I don't know. I mean, you tell me, but most accounts did not confirm, but did say that essentially that Jonathan Papelbon literally, lifted his leg and passed gas in the direction of poor Derek Gunn. So I don't know, but nevertheless, we move on. And the Phillies, aside from just Jonathan Papelbon alone, talk about their week a little bit. As last Tuesday, they had, the home opener was postponed, as I was talking about, and they had a 4-game series against the Atlanta Braves, division rivals. They were only able to get one win out of that series, a 1-0 win against the Braves last Thursday after a 1-0 loss against the Braves. And that for the most part, you look at these games that they've had in the past week, and the hitting, they continue to struggle to hit for the most part. 1-0 loss. Their pitching has been, decent in some of these games. Obviously, you're only holding the Braves to 1 run, even though you can't hit. 1-0 loss. Then the next day you win 1-0. But again, I mean, the pitching's solid, but obviously, you're not getting too many hits. And then, over the weekend, the Easter weekend, they that evolved into an away series at the Colorado Rockies. And I mean, you start off with a 12-1 loss. Then the next day, 3-1 loss. Again, hitting continues to be absolutely abysmal. And then Easter Sunday, after the Flyers have their big win, suddenly their hitting explodes again, and they win 10-9 against the Rockies. And I mean, I don't know. It's kind of mind-boggling how they just go several games and they can't hit worth a lick, and then all of a sudden, they have this big explosion, and they just they score 10 runs and win 10-9 against the Colorado Rockies. And then yesterday against the LA Dodgers, I mean, winning 7-0. So I mean, I don't know. It's a very spotty season so far with the Philadelphia Phillies. Which I mean, we kind of assumed. They're 9-10 right now. I mean, they get a big win over a good team yesterday in the LA Dodgers, but and they have them 3 more times today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Let's see how they do the rest of that series, and then after that they got a series at Arizona against the Diamondbacks, who are an absolutely dreck baseball team, obviously, but. So I mean, it's definitely interesting. I mean, the Phillies continue to sit around 500, but I mean, again, a couple days in a row they can pitch really well, but they can't hit. Then they can't pitch, but they can hit. One after the other, and score 10 runs, 7 runs, whatever. I don't know. It's definitely a big question mark with the Philadelphia Phillies, and I guess a matter of guys staying healthy as well, and a lot of these older players that you wonder how healthy they can stay. I don't know. It's definitely an interesting season as we roll along here with the Philadelphia Phillies, and as I mentioned as well, the NBA playoffs have been. Definitely, interesting thus far too. I mean, we have the, obviously, you have the typical series that are going to be predictable. I mean, the Spurs and the Dallas Mavericks. A lot of times these 1 and 8 seed series and 2 to 7 seed series. You wonder sometimes, like, is there even a point to them? Because in this day and age with the NBA. Typically it's, the power of, I don't know what I want to say, but the balance of power, is ridiculously panned, more so than other sports. But I mean, the Indiana Pacers, I mean, they're the 1 seed in the East, and they're showing signs of falling apart here. I mean, at the worst time possible is, the Atlanta Hawks get the first win in that series. So I mean, they're up against they're up 1-0 against the Pacers, whereas Miami against the Charlotte Bobcats, 2-7 matchup. Miami's on top there. But then you got a series like the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Memphis Grizzlies in the West. A rematch series of last year that the Grizzlies were able to win. They're tied 1-1. A 2-7 seed matchup, and that looks like that could be a good series. The Clippers are tied 1-1 with the Golden State Warriors, and the San Antonio Spurs, who might be the favorite coming out of the West at the 1 seed. They're up 1-0 against the Dallas Mavericks. But yeah, I mean, obviously the big upset of the week was had to be the Atlanta Hawks taking the first game over the Indiana Pacers. So that That's definitely interesting. Now my dad checked in actually on the show Facebook page and said, did you see Kevin Durant's ridiculous 3-point shot last night? I did not see it yet. I mean, I was busy finishing up schoolwork for the week, obviously, but I guess I'll have to check that out. But I mean, nevertheless, I mean, there's definitely been, I've been watching, bits and pieces of games here and there, and there's definitely been some interesting NBA action going on. And, again, the NHL playoffs, they roll on as well with the Flyers, which we'll discuss a little more coming up in the next segment of the program here, the final period of the segment, I guess, if you want to go hockey, the third period. And again, I mean, kind of to recap some of what we've been talking about today, in case you're just turning on the radio on, Kutztown Radio or whatever, firing up the stream. Donovan McNabb, the DUI arrest comes out last week. A rather embarrassing mugshot gets leaked out, and we got Jonathan Papelbon. I like how I kind of said James Bond there in a way. Literally, I guess, by most accounts, passing gas in the direction of Comcast Sportsnet's own Derek Gunn when asked about his throwing velocity, not the other kind of velocity. Maybe he was kind of symbolically referring to. I don't know. But anyways, it's the Tyler Werner Show. We're heading into the next break right here on Kutztown Radio.
Kutztown University's Department of Information Technology recently launched MyKU Mobile, which can be accessed at mykumobile.kutztown.edu. MyKU Mobile provides a quick way for students to view grades, financial aid information, announcements, and schedules, all from your phone. The new site also integrates with social networking sites, enabling students to post their schedules on Twitter and Facebook without ever having to use a computer. Make sure to visit myku.kutztown.edu for the best way to view MyKU on your phone.
Okay, so just type the job website address here. That's it. Then you enter what job you're looking for there.
Electrician. This is Peter. Recently, he got help going on the internet for the first time to look for a new job.
Okay, then you just hit search and...
In the past, Peter's gotten work through people he knew, but he heard there were more jobs online.
There we go.
These are all for me?
Uh-huh.
Really? He had no idea just how many.
I can't believe it. This one looks good.
Peter is thinking the internet might be for him after all.
And this is just one website.
Wow. Why didn't I do this sooner?
See what the internet can help you do at everyoneon.org or call 1-855-387-9166 to find a free training class near you. Brought to you by Connect to Compete and the Ad Council.
Lo último que recuerdas es que estabas bailando. ¿Cómo llegaste ahí? ¿No lo recuerdas? ¿Fuiste a una fiesta, bebiste demasiado y ahora no estás seguro a dónde vas?
¿Quién es esta persona? Empezó como una diversión, pero ahora no se siente tan divertido. La próxima vez, quédate en la fiesta si quieres. Baila y diviértete. Conoce más a la persona que te acompaña, pero no bebas demasiado alcohol.
Cuida a la persona que ves todos los días en el espejo. Una noche puede cambiar tu vida por completo.
Edúcate. This message was brought to you by the KU Health Ambassadors.
Me gusta mi gente. Chile caliente.
.1242 right here on the Tyler Werner Show on Kutztown Radio. Talking Philadelphia sports and just sports in general going on. As we had a big Easter weekend of sports fun going on across the NBA playoffs. Even without the Sixers, obviously. An interesting Flyers playoff series going on that continues tonight. And some up and down Phillies baseball, I guess you could say, some unpredictable baseball. I'm checking out this on mute, this incredible 3-point shot by Kevin Durant from the Oklahoma City Thunder last night, making an insane shot, as he kind of just 3-point shot as he kind of just, falls, crashes his way down to the court, into the, in the out of bounds area, and he gets the big 3-point shot off. And just all kinds of good basketball going on in the NBA right now. Less a little more unpredictable maybe than you'd think. And of course, aside from sports, though, this past weekend, everybody out there, you're always on this show. You're always welcome to share, what you did over the weekend or whatever. And we open doors like that on this show. As it can go hand in hand with sports, I guess, in a way. Easter's one of the big holidays of the year, and obviously we had the Flyers game on Easter, and we had the Phillies getting a big win, and but around that, what else did you do over the weekend? How did you celebrate Easter and this and that? I said last week how I think first and foremost, you celebrate Easter for the the real reasons, the right reason, the integrity of the holiday. And actually I've been attending this one church. I went to preschool actually at this one church out near where I've lived, basically almost my entire life. Robinson Lutheran Church. And actually, this year I thought I'd step my game up a little bit. They have this Easter brunch before, they have an Easter service, and I kind of I have this weird memory of as a child eating one Easter morning eating lemon poppy seed muffins, as obscure as it sounds. And I think it's an underrated kind of muffin, if you will. And so I stepped my game up, and for the Easter brunch at the service, I baked a dozen of them, and I think that deserves a little round of applause. I stepped my game up, and I baked some lemon poppy seed muffins. Maybe I'm one of the last people you'd think would do something like that, but that's what I did. I like to. I like to help out, and with the church, and I do a little something. This past week, especially, I did something where you like help out the pastor, during the service. You make announcements and stuff like that, and I think it's a good thing for me to do. As a on the radio here, it's public speaking, and it's good. Either way, it's a good opportunity to practice that, and working with different kinds of microphones. I take an audio class, and getting to use different kind of microphones and this and that, and like I said, help lighten the workload for the pastor, and make announcements, lead a little bit in the song, and it's definitely a little tradition I've something I've been doing for a couple years there now. It's a good opportunity. Yes, at the Robinson Lutheran Church, out near where I live. And then of course, as I mentioned before, go to my grandparents every year, and have that's where I have my my traditional Easter ham lunch or dinner, I guess you could say, and obviously that's a big,
like sweet and sour pork, right?
That's like a big, Easter tradition, and ham. I guess you can kind of call it sweet and sour pork. I don't know, but nevertheless, as I like to say here on the Tyler Werner Show, we had a big Flyers game going on Easter Sunday, and I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like every Easter Sunday the Flyers have some sort of game, no matter how late or early Easter falls. But yeah, I mean, again, I mean, going back to earlier in the show, I mean, that's that's kind of the main thing right now with Philadelphia sports. The Flyers in the playoffs. The NHL is normally considered fourth in the pecking order as far as the four major team sports in America goes. But right now, I mean, the Flyers, they tied up the series, and essentially they stole a game from the New York Rangers, and I think that's the big key in this series, the fact that they were able to steal a game, and essentially get rid of this whole idea that they can't win at Madison Square Garden, and they haven't won there in the past 9 or 10 games or however many it was, they were losses at Madison Square Garden, and here the Flyers got that monkey off their back this past Sunday, and now it makes it only easier for them to maybe go in there and win again. But I mean, obviously the Flyers have the next 2 games at home, and certainly riding off the heels of that big win against New York, I got to think that the Flyers are going to be fired up tonight, and have to be confident. I mean, they had to come. They were down 2 goals in that game too, and they came back. Ray Emery, even though he's the backup goaltender, played very well, and is going by the looks of it. Steve Mason is not 100% yet, and so Ray Emery is going to once again be between the pipes tonight, as they would say, as hockey analysts and would say with that lingo. But whether Steve Mason or Ray Emery is in goal, I know it's been much debate as to who should be in goal. In this series, I don't think that is really what it comes down to. The Flyers, I mean, ultimately, I mean, the Rangers are not a high-scoring team typically. For the most part, I mean, they're anchored by Henrik Lundqvist, a great goaltender of their own that they have, and I think it's just a matter of the Flyers, playing disciplined hockey. And now, I mean, they did take a lot of penalties once again, the Flyers, in this past Sunday's game, but they were able to, they're still able to, kill the penalties pretty well and play pretty solid. Yeah, I guess solid defensively. I mean, then again, I mean, Ray Emery had 33 shots against him. I mean, I guess it's, an average amount. But, he definitely stood on his head, as they would say, and, saved 94% of the shots. In this day and age, that's very good in a hockey game. So, I mean, the Flyers, though, I mean, Claude Giroux, Captain Claude Giroux, even though he hasn't gotten a shot on goal in either of these first 2 games of the series, he definitely made his presence known last night, and or not last night, the other afternoon on Easter Sunday. But I mean, he assisted Jacob Voracek's goal, and I mean, he still makes his presence, and he definitely can be a great playmaker, even when he's not getting shots on goal. And, I mean, Jacob Voracek had the first goal for the Flyers in that game that, a very impressive, wrist shot goal. He had like a 5-inch window to put the puck in, and, he puts it in, and, that gets things started, really, for the Flyers. And then the second period is when they tie the game with Jason Akeson and Braden Shen, Vincent Lecavier assisting on that, tying the game. And then a little later in the same period, you got Luke Shen, the other Shen brother, on the Flyers, getting a goal, getting the lead goal, I guess you could say, to take the lead with a backhand shot, assisted by Michael Raffel and Adam Hall. And then, obviously, the Flyers had to, play some solid defense the rest of the way in the game in the third period, and fortunately they do, and they hold the Rangers scoreless in the second and third period, and getting getting an empty net goal in the closing seconds of the game with Wayne Simmons putting that one in, and assisted by Matt Reed. So again, I mean, the Flyers get this monkey off their back essentially, that they can't win at Madison Square Gardens and this and that. And I think now that they did that, after, coming off of that momentum of the game, I think the Flyers have to win this series here. I mean, they don't have to, because if I'm thinking long term, there's no way I see the Flyers in the Stanley Cup Finals or anything like that. But it's the playoffs here, and we're not going to think long term necessarily when you got the Flyers in the middle of a playoff series. Fans are thinking short term, obviously, thinking for the moment. And, I think as far as this series is concerned, I think the Flyers should now win the series. Last week I wasn't sure if they'd win either two of these games. I wasn't very confident in them. And especially after the first 4-1 loss, I just thought, geez, they can't stay disciplined, and they couldn't even, they can't score. They score, a 4-1 loss. I mean, it kind of just, to me, it was like, this might be a sign of things to come for the series. And, I thought maybe the Flyers would get a couple home wins, and, maybe the Rangers would take this series 4-2, but it all changes now that the Flyers got that win the other day at Madison Square Gardens. And, the Rangers, too, now got to be thinking, all of a sudden the Flyers can, beat us in our home ice again. And, again, the Flyers now they're bringing the series over to Philadelphia for the next two games, for tonight and the next game after that. Now, I think tonight, I definitely think riding off that momentum from that game the other day, and if the Flyers can also maybe cut back on the unnecessary penalties, and just continue to ride Ray Emery, who played well the other day, I think the Flyers should win tonight. Now, maybe the Rangers then tie it back up in Game 4, but I think the Flyers, even though it's a 1-1 tie here in the series, the Flyers have control over this series right now. And I think it's just a matter of them putting it together, scoring and, staying disciplined. And, I think, again, now the next time the Flyers go up to Madison Square Garden to play the Rangers in their own building, I think the Flyers, will be a little more comfortable knowing that, last time we were here, we beat the Rangers, and, that whole monkey's off our back, as I already said. And the Flyers, I think they have the advantage here. I mean, the Rangers have a great goaltender, but they're not going to, most games, they're not going to score, even against Ray Emery, who's he's a decent backup goaltender. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sell him short. But, the Rangers, they're not a big, high-scoring team, and they're not loaded with all kinds of, offensive, powerhouses and this and that. I really think the Flyers, they get a win tonight, and, they really got New York right where they want them, because there's no more, major home ice disadvantage, or, that the Flyers have if they have to go to Madison Square Garden to beat the Rangers. It's not, that whole thing is over now. That whole thing. So that's that. And now it was an incredible weekend, I think, as far as sports goes. With the NBA playoffs getting underway, kind of like football. You got this game, and then you got the next. You don't got two games going on at the same time. There's definitely some cool stuff that kind of helps pass time a little bit as I'm working at Red Lobster. And, see the TVs in the bar area, and you got an NBA game up, and on another screen maybe you have an NHL game going up. There was definitely some interesting playoff hockey, though, as well, as I kind of hinted at earlier, in conjunction with the NHL playoffs. I definitely want to point out the St. Louis Blues and the Chicago Blackhawks series. Of course, the St. Louis Blues, essentially the first place team in the West, if I'm not mistaken, having a series against the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Chicago Blackhawks. And the other day, I'm watching the highlights, and now I don't know his first name, but Chicago Blackhawks player Seabrook, who who is this? He had this incredible hit. And again, I don't always advocate, big rough hits. He had like a Zach Ronaldo-like hit that ended up getting him suspended. But, definitely a big hit that the Blues player had to endure, kind of like going almost head first into the boards. And it was just the game between those two teams the other day was just like back and forth, incredible hockey between the St. Louis Blues, a new, team that's up there in the West now, and the defending Stanley Cup Chicago Blackhawks. So the Blackhawks did get a big win to kind of stay alive in the series as they're down 2-1. But there's other stuff going on, and we'll see where things are next week with the NHL playoffs and the NBA playoffs and the Phillies and the Flyers and this and that. As we're out of time today on this pretty nice late April afternoon here in Kutztown. For now I'll leave you off until next week. Thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for the podcast if you missed any of this show or want to hear any of it again on the Facebook page later on. So everybody have a great